Hello, this is a quick tutorial to walk you through and remind you what we talked about in class today in regards to completing your outline, which is due tonight by midnight. So, most of your outline should be completed. If you are still working on your specs and analysis, there's another tutorial that you can watch in Classroom to remind you how to do those sections, as well as the introduction and your proof statements. The purpose of this tutorial, it will just be very quickly, and it will focus on the A's, ones and twos, B's, ones and twos, and your closing. So, just a reminder, in writing, we create that funnel that we've talked about. The first statement that you created was your thesis statement, which is that large, broad statement that's really big. And the intention of writing is we start with this big argument, and then our job is to figure out how to narrow it down to get to the evidence that's going to prove that our point is correct. So, the next step of what we did in our development of that is we created these three proof statements whose job it was to introduce the categories of politics, culture, military, or social as the three areas that we're going to focus on in order to better prove our argument. So we've narrowed it down. You'll notice, once again, just as a reminder, that your A statement is your to statement, your B is your Roman numeral 3, and C is Roman numeral 4. So when we think about our funnel, our to statement is basically telling the reader that this entire section, up until Roman numeral 3, is going to be about the political system. And even though that's a narrowed statement, it's still a really big idea. So we need to continue to create bridges until we get to our evidence to fully develop the writing piece that we're trying to write. So now that we've introduced our political section, we're now going to introduce each of our spec sections separately. So your A statement's job is to introduce A to analysis, and your B statement's job is to introduce B to analysis. And so your A statement should simply take whatever classification of what your specs are about and restate them using the idea of the thesis. So, for instance, I'm giving a hypothetical, and remember, your 1A may not be about satraps. This is simply just for my example. You would say whatever specs 1A's classification is. So in this case, if my specs was about satraps, I would say the Persian satraps were more developed. Notice that I'm using words from the thesis, but I've changed them so that I'm not using the word advanced again. I'm using a synonym. So we're more developed than, and then I would put the Athenian assembly, which is my second specs classification. If it's Persian women, you could say the treatment of Persian women was much further along than the treatment of Athenian women. You could talk about education, religion. Just make sure that you're classifying what your specs is about, and you're saying that the first specs was more advanced than the second specs. But what we've done is we've changed some of our words so we're not continually using the words advanced over and over and over again. Okay? So go through and do your A's and B's with that thought in mind. I would pause here before you listen to the next section in case you need to finish that part. All right. So if the A's job is to introduce A through analysis, and B's job is to introduce B through analysis, we need to narrow one more time. And this is where we narrow to introduce our specific example. Now, how to do this? You're going to look at your analysis statement, and you're going to say to yourself, why is this specs that I chose for 1A advanced? And you may have said, like, the satraps of Persia were advanced because they were an efficient way to govern a large territory for the Persian kings. So in my brain, I would say, okay, how can I introduce that idea with connecting to my analysis while also introducing my specs? So you'll notice that I take the first part of my A statement, the satraps, and then I say we're an efficient political structure. I don't mention anything about the Athenian assembly. And I have clarified that in my brain, I will explain to you in the analysis why they were efficient. But for now, I'm giving you bias and I'm introducing what my specs is going to be about. So by saying the satraps were an efficient political structure, my specs better be a fact that is detailed, that it clearly explains how they were efficient without being biased. And then in my analysis, I will explain how they were an efficient structure. From there, you go on. The first thing you need to do is create what's called a contrast transition. So I would say, unlike Persia, as opposed to Greece, in contrast to Greece. So you're telling the reader that you're switching from this specs, which is advanced, and you're going to show a contrast with your next specific example. After the comma, then you introduce the specs. So I say the Athenian assembly. So I take the second half of my sentence up here and I say the Athenian assembly. Then in my brain, I ask myself, I go down to my analysis and I say, what about the Athenian assembly was not advanced? And my because would be the Athenian assembly was open to any male citizen, which meant that you had a large number trying to make decisions, which could be timely and inefficient to getting stuff done. So in my brain, I thought about, okay, with that explanation, how can I introduce it with a biased thought, a biased word that would tell the reader that it's something that is not advanced? So in my brain, I thought that was chaotic. That sounds like a really chaotic governmental system. So I said the Athenian assembly was chaotic. And then I would give the specs that would describe the men showing up. They had to use the rope to get them to herd them in, to make a decision. It was loud and noisy, whatever the detailed fact is. And then my analysis would explain how it was chaotic. So down here, I need to explain what did I mean when I came up with that word. So you're going to notice that my 1 connects to the first part of my analysis, which explains why the specs advanced, and my 2 connects to the analysis that explains why the other side is not advanced. And I'm going to do the same pattern for my 1s and 2s under B, once again looking at the analysis as a way to come up with a way to introduce and connect the 2. Think of this like a sandwich where the top part of your sandwich is kind of introducing it. You put all the good stuff in the middle, which is your evidence. And then the bottom half is kind of the explanation as to why all of this is going to come together. Okay. So that is your A, 1s and 2s. I hope this helps. Once again, I would pause before going to the last section. So the last section of what you're doing of the outline is your closing. Your closing has 3 sentences to it. The idea of a closing is now you are wrapping up everything that you've done and you're bringing it to a close. So the first thing that you should do in your closing is you should restate the main idea of the thesis. And I use that by you do not copy and paste the thesis statement and put it down here. When I say main idea, you need to take your 2 civilizations and you need to change the word more advanced and somehow give the final thought of overall, this was more something than the other civilization. Main idea, do not make it word for word as you did for the opening thesis. Then you're going to do a restatement of proof areas. In this case, your proof areas were your 3 areas that you focused on: political, cultural, and either military or social. And you would say the political structure, cultural facets, and military or social system in Greece or Persia was more advanced than Greece or Persia, depending on what side you took. Okay? Very simple statement. 1 sentence can sum it up. Then you do what's called an overall thought. And basically the idea of this is you're just drawing everything to a close. You've already proven Greece and Persia. We don't need to go back and do that again. You're simply going to say, overall, many factors can make a civilization advanced, because you have spent an exhaustive amount of time proving that one civilization is more advanced than another, and there are factors in civilizations such as politics, social, military, and cultural that can make a civilization advanced. So that's the idea of your closing. Okay, so that walks you through the remainder of your outline. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to email me. Remember, your outlines are due tonight by midnight, so please don't forget to finish. Make sure to hit turn in on Classroom, and so that way I see the timestamp. If I don't, I will go back and look at the last time that you typed before midnight, and that's where I will grade up till. All right, once again, email me with any questions. Good luck.